Confrontation and Decision. The salt spray stung Alara's face as she walked towards the familiar bench, the rhythmic crash of waves a counterpoint to the frantic beat of her heart. 3 weeks of agonizing indecision had led to this moment, a confrontation she knew she couldn't avoid. She'd spent those weeks poring over her notes, rereading the Chronoscape series, searching for inconsistencies, for a clue, a single detail that would either confirm or deny her increasingly unsettling theory. The man, Jax, or whoever he was, had become a ghost in her mind, a phantom limb of her imagination made disturbingly real. She found him where she expected, gazing out at the ocean, the same melancholy cast to his features that she'd painstakingly rendered onto the page. The sun, setting in a blaze of oranges and reds, painted him in an almost ethereal light, making him appear more fictional than real, a paradox that only amplified the strange situation. He looked up as she approached, his eyes, the exact shade of stormy grey she'd described in countless pages, meeting hers. A flicker of recognition, or was it something else entirely, crossed his features. "I knew you'd come back," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated with a depth she hadn't anticipated. It was the voice she'd created, the voice she'd heard echoing in her head for years, but hearing it uttered by a man standing on a real beach, under a real sky, sent shivers down her spine. Alara took a deep breath, her carefully constructed plan suddenly feeling fragile and inadequate. This wasn't a book. There were no convenient plot devices or deus ex machina moments to rescue her from this bizarre reality. She had to rely on her wit, her intuition, and perhaps a little bit of luck. "It's unexpected," she began, her voice trembling slightly, betraying her carefully composed exterior. "I mean, seeing you here, on this beach." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air, watching his reaction closely. He remained impassive, his expression unreadable. She decided to plunge into the deep end. "Jax," she said, testing the name, feeling the weight of its implications. "Do you remember the Krill invasion?" His gaze intensified, a subtle shift in his expression that she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't spent years studying his every nuance, every subtle twitch of a muscle, every flicker of emotion in his fictional eyes. "The Krill? Yes. A devastating loss," he replied, his tone somber, perfectly mirroring the scene she'd written. It was more than a resemblance, it was unnervingly precise. Alara pressed on, weaving a tapestry of subtle questions, probing deeper into the intricacies of the Chronoscape narrative. She brought up specific details, obscure references, plot points that only a true inhabitant of that fictional world would know. She spoke about the hidden passage in the citadel of Xylus, the secret language of the Eldrin, the prophecy of the obsidian star, details that even she, the creator, might have forgotten if she hadn't pored over her own manuscript so intently in the past weeks. With each correct answer, the ice in Alara's veins melted, replaced by a growing sense of dread, of wonder, and of something akin to terror. He knew. He knew things that no one should know, things that existed only within the confines of her own imagination. But were they really just her imagination anymore? His answers weren't just correct, they were laced with a depth of emotion, a personal experience, that transcended the written word. He recounted events with a vividness, a raw emotional intensity, that she hadn't even captured on the page. It was as though he was reliving those experiences, not just recalling them. He described the weight of the Krill's defeat, the loss of his comrades, not as a character recounting events, but as a man bearing the scars of a real war, a war waged in a world that shouldn't exist. The obsidian star. Its light. It felt like a promise, a hope, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. But the hope. It was fleeting. He paused and looked away from her, into the vast expanse of the ocean, as if searching for something lost. Or perhaps, it was never truly there. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. That wasn't in the book. That was something he had added himself. A layer of personal interpretation, of lived experience, that she hadn't written, yet somehow it felt intrinsically linked to her creation. It was as if her fictional world had grown, evolved, surpassing even her own authorship, developing a consciousness of its own. The sun dipped further below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the beach. The air grew colder, the sound of the waves now a more ominous roar, reflecting the growing unease in Elara's heart. She needed more proof, a definitive answer, but the subtle probing questions were no longer enough. She needed a confrontation, a direct challenge. "Tell me," Elara said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Tell me something only Jax would know. Something I didn't write." Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing the suspense building between them. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable, yet the faintest glimmer of something, defiance? Fear? Flickered in his eyes. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of brine and the faint, almost imperceptible, smell of ozone. He opened his mouth to speak, but before a single word escaped his lips, a flash of blinding light erupted from the ocean, swallowing the beach in a searing white glow. Elara shielded her eyes, a scream caught in her throat, the sound swallowed by the deafening roar that accompanied the light. When the blinding light subsided, leaving a lingering afterimage on her retinas, the man was gone. The beach was empty, the only sound the relentless, crashing waves, their rhythm now a chilling, insistent drumbeat of unanswered questions. The wind carried the faintest whisper, a word lost to the distance, a haunting echo of a name she could barely decipher, Chronoscape. Elara stumbled back, her legs weak, the sand cold beneath her bare feet. The boundary between her world and the world she'd created had not just blurred, it had shattered. She wasn't just an author anymore, she was a character in a story far beyond her control, a story unfolding at a terrifying pace. The confrontation had ended, but the real conflict, the battle for the authorship of her own reality, had only just begun. The implications of what had just happened were colossal. Had Jax truly crossed over? Or was this some elaborate, surreal hallucination brought on by stress, a manifestation of her deepest fears and anxieties? Was she losing her mind? The lingering smell of ozone was a tangible reminder of the supernatural event, solidifying the reality of what she'd experienced. As she walked away from the beach, leaving behind the shattered remnants of her certainties, the question of what was real gnawed at her. The idyllic beach, once a source of inspiration, had become a battlefield, and she was caught in the crossfire. She was stranded in a liminal space, between the worlds of fiction and reality, and the answers, she knew, lay somewhere in the haunting enigma of Chronoscape. The cliffhanger of the encounter, however, was nothing compared to the terrifying cliffhanger of her reality. The very fabric of her life, the ground beneath her feet, was crumbling, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty, grappling with the unsettling notion that perhaps the stories we create might, in some unimaginable way, hold the power to create their own realities. And she, the author, was utterly unprepared for the consequences. The unsettling truth, that fiction had found its own way into reality, was a horrifying possibility she now had to face. The implications were vast, far-reaching, and terrifyingly uncertain. What if other characters from her work were to follow suit? What was she to do now, alone in this new, unsettling reality that had been irrevocably altered by the lines between fiction and reality being blurred? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as heavy and ominous as the approaching storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She needed answers, and fast. Her own life, and perhaps the fate of two worlds, depended on it.